everybody, it's July 29th. This is God's Comic, Brad Stine. This is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. What are you people doing here? I know exactly what you're doing. You're here to listen to our incredible guest, the Podfather, Adam Curry. That's right. The guy that invented podcasts is actually going to be on my podcast to tell me why his podcast was so brilliant and why my podcast has issues. And his biggest reason was my son, Wyatt Leroy Stein. Wyatt, say hi to everybody.
You just getting paid for every time you say the word podcast in this podcast?
Well, you know, it's funny because I was talking to the copyright owner of the word podcast, and he said, listen, how would you like my podcast copyrightness to be a sponsor on your show? And I said, well, what kind of a podcast would it be if I continued to say podcast? And he said, well, it'd be a good podcast because it would let people know, A, that it's a podcast, B, that it's your podcast, and 3, that it's a podcast that's worth listening to. As you cast it out in Podland, they can bring it in. By the way, do you know where the word podcast came from?
Adam Curry.
Well, kind of. But do you know where
I do not know the etymology of the word.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there was, when they first began the technology of downloads, when all the social media thing began to sort of hit the ground, and everybody was suddenly going on the internet, and suddenly everybody had an iPhone, you know, all the things that has become de rigueur for your people, your age group. That's all you've ever known. You didn't know it was possible to live in a life without a cell phone or a personal computer. As a matter of fact, you think that anything before 1990 was Stone Age-ish.
Well, yeah, but then the 2000s were the Bronze Age.
Yes.
Yeah,
and yet you were part of that.
Yeah, I remember making my first bronze sword. It sucked.
How come?
Well, I mean, iron had just been invented, and I was still using bronze.
So you were like, okay.
Totally embarrassing.
That's like the medieval equivalent of the lava lamp. You know, nice little novelty, but it's so last millennium.
I do not believe that they had lava lamps back in the 16th century, but then again, I'm not a history buff.
They had lava.
And they had lamps.
So perhaps that's how they came up with the term lava lamp, similar to
maybe
podcast.
A lamp salesman accidentally drove to Pompeii or something. Who knows?
We don't know, Wyatt, and that's why we're on Brad Stine Has Issues, to discover what is going on this earth and see if people can get some clarity. That's why I call it, you know, comedy and conservatism and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity.
Yeah, I remember when you wanted to pitch that to be the name of the podcast, and it's just like, you have the enthusiasm, but I just don't really think that that's a bit of a tongue twister, you know?
It is a bit of a tongue twister.
I mean, you can hardly say it half the time.
I do say it every time, actually.
Yeah, but you sometimes you're more successful than others.
I think I nail it.
I think you try to nail it.
No, I think I take it to the hoop.
The hoop?
Yeah.
Really? Because didn't you just mess it up like 10 seconds ago?
Yeah.
Which would prove my point that you sometimes don't always get it right.
So I was denied the hoop.
Yes, you tried to swish it, but instead you just hit the rim.
Did that look like I drank something, Wyatt?
It sounded like you drank something.
Yeah, I just faked it.
Why is the like universal sign of I just drank something? Hey, world, look at this. I just drank something.
What I wanted to do was show the magic of the camera and how, you know, in you know, Hollywood land and anything to do with production, everything's pretend, everything's fake, everything's not real,
Everything's CGI nowadays. I'm surprised the liquid in the coffee isn't CGI at this point.
Maybe it is.
You know,
maybe we'll put it in later.
In post.
In post. Well, you know what? Speaking of post, we were previously discussing the word podcast, not postcast, not pod post, podcast. We got sidetracked because you started blithering.
Oh, yes, of course. Always blame the tech guy. Always blame the tech guy with the power to mute you in live on air for all the mistakes. I'm sure that will end swimmingly for you.
Well, let me tell you something, son. Sometimes a man's just got to buck up and say, hey, I'm going to pull myself up by my own bootstraps, and I'm going to put on my big boy pants, my big boy 10-gallon hat, and get out there to the steers and wrestle them and take full responsibility for this ranch that I've created that has gone amok.
So, in other words, blame me.
Yeah, blame you. Well, but I gave it with a flowery language.
You certainly tried. But I saw right through that ruse of yours. Nice try, though. Nice. I'll give you that. Nice try. So, about that podcast thing,
it's funny.
Somehow keep getting interrupted on.
Funny you should bring that up. So, anyways, during all of sort of the technological age, sort of the renaissance of the 2000s, maybe in the 90s, I'm trying to think of when it started, but they came out with an app, I think an Apple iPod. Ever heard of it? An iPod?
Heard of it. I owned one. Okay. I still own one.
Those little things, right?
Yeah, the one with like the circle, like pad you can switch to. Yeah.
And what did you use the iPods for?
Well, me primarily music.
Okay. So how did you get the music? Was it stored in there?
I had to download it.
You downloaded it. So what if somebody decided to have a show, a program of their very own that wasn't just music, but was just sort of people talking or going through interviews or some interesting interaction, and they put that into the atmosphere, and you could download it into your iPod, and you could cast it into your ears to listen to some people having some.
Okay, that makes sort of sense. The pod part makes sense. Yeah. But when you say cast it into your ears, it sounds less like you're playing it and more like you're casting a magic spell.
No. Here's the deal.
Abracadabra. Music in your ears spell. You know, like the lamest wizard ever.
Okay, but here's the deal, and here's what you have to understand. Okay. Normally, it's a broadcast. You're broadcasting on radio. You are broadcasting on television. So this time, you are broadcasting through an iPod, thus making it a
So what you're saying is podcast is actually a portmanteau of iPod and broadcast.
Pretty much.
Do you even remember what a portmanteau is?
Yeah, that's what happens when you take two words to make a different word.
It is one of my favorite words.
I know.
And I'm so happy I have finally converted you onto it.
Now, let me pronounce it properly. Portmanteau.
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 Portmanteau, yeah.
Okay. So port is where ships dock. And towel
is something you use to wipe off yourself once you go swimming.
So portmanteau.
Yeah, portmanteau.
Okay, you had a problem. You spoke and then pushed the button on, then spoke and then pushed the button.
Here's the issue. When you have to constantly mute yourself because you don't want the audience to hear a terrible shriek because of your microphone, sometimes you forget what's mute and what's unmute, and then you swap them in your head, and then it causes a really awkward conversation with the co-host.
I think the bigger question is, what did you call it? A terrifying shriek?
Yeah, shriek.
Okay.
You could also call it a shrill shriek if you wanted to go for the alliteration.
But here's my point.
Yep.
Don't you think shriek encapsulates what you're going for? We don't need this sort of adjective, terrifying, or...
you can have happy shrieks. Like if you're ever excited, yeah!
Oh,
like that,
shriek with happiness.
Yeah,
you
it's
shriek
rare, but
desire.
it does happen. It does happen.
Okay. So again, my bad. I was trying to see if you were just redundant in adding words that weren't necessary. But
okay, I'm sorry. You wanted to see if I was redundant. Mr. said the word podcast 50 times in 20 seconds at the beginning of this.
No, because I was setting up for the idea that we were having the Podfather, the guy that created podcasts, on today,
okay, cool.
Adam Curry,
Great.
who
Awesome.
used to be on MTV as a VJ, Wyatt. Did you ever watch a VJ on MTV? I think not. Why? You were much too young.
Yeah. I mean, they have them on YouTube now, like archives of the old ones.
Yeah.
So.
Well, anyways, he's one of those. But now he wasn't, and I think I missaid this, but he corrected me. He wasn't one of the original VJs. Which I think it started in 79 or 80, MTV, the first ones. But he was few years later. So he was up there pretty quickly. And you guys are going to hear the whole story of his life, his career, how he got into it, why they picked him, where they found him, why they used him, and again, his influence on social media and the things that have been created that he was directly involved with. So you're going to be fascinated by Adam Curry and this particular episode. But you know what? This is a unique episode today. I was thinking about this. Every episode, we do the same thing. I take a glance over here, and sure enough, there's Ashley Haas. Now, I don't know if I've heard that name before. It sounds familiar. Oh.
Is that the mime we found at that park who kept trying to do like the trapped in the box thing?
That was what it was. That was it. I think so.
Yeah, I think.
And it took us like an hour to read her lips to say when she said, "What's your name?" and she kept going.
No. It took us an hour to get her out of the box. It turns out there was an actual box, not an illusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was an awkward conversation.
Well, it was because, you know, when you're kind of starting out in miming and you don't know that the box really should be pretend, you run the risk of it going sideways.
Yeah,
or in this case, squared.
And then there was like the whole FBI chasing her because she stole that top secret invisibility technology or whatever.
Okay,
Which honestly, like, you know, props to you for like going above and beyond, but you know, now you're on the FBI's most wanted list. Now you gotta hide out for the rest of your life. Was it worth it?
I don't know. Maybe
Probably
it was.
not. Was it cool? Absolutely, it was cool.
Yeah, at least it ended up on a podcast. What more could you want?
Yeah.
But you know, here's the deal. I mean, we got just another guy, or as we like to call him, Saint Nick. We got Karen Board or Cabo. We have you know, but we got the bushwhacker. Bushquacker. We have the bushwhacker. I turned him into a lawn maintenance man. Wyatt.
Speaking of bushwhacker, the lawn guys came in today.
Exactly, bushwhacker. But I'm trying to do it out of the side of my eye, and I'm making headway. But
I can absolutely tell you without a shadow of a doubt, you failed miserably.
Yes, I did. Paula Faye Marie Rauchi finally rediscovered her other two names. You know, we have them all, and they all come every Monday, White, and God bless them. I love to say them. I love to quote them. I love to see what they're up to. I love it when they come and say hi. I love it when Danny shows up again, getting out of the bunker in Canada. We all love the folks that show up, and we want to talk about them, and we do, and we're so grateful for them. But, you know, I thought, too, we got to mix it up a little bit, and I was wondering if maybe we took a little time and maybe it will crash and burn. I mean, what would be new?
What would be Brad Stine Has Issues without crippling issues?
Yes, but what I was curious about, just off the top of my head, we've done, you know, we're getting up there like son. I don't know, we should count, but I think we're getting up onto our 70th or more episodes. So we're heading to 100, triple digits. That's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you have anything planned for the 100th?
Not your business.
I'm the co-host and also the one who would have to send anything to the editor. So I mean, you don't have to tell me, but it's gonna make that episode pretty awkward.
How about we bring you on and interview in silhouette?
That could work.
Okay, that's possible. We'll put up like a screen and it'll backlit, so they'll just see your face or your profile or your head. Or we just put up a question mark and let that be you, and you just, I don't know.
Or you could be the one behind here pressing buttons, and I could be the one over there in silhouette doing the rest of the podcast.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, don't think I won't.
Of course, I have to baby proof everything for you, but I think it could work.
Well, here's what I am curious about from the folks out there in Wonderland. Do you guys think that that it would be interesting to bring Wyatt on? We do have the capabilities. You know, we've got that GoPro somewhere. We could set that up at your station where you run the show, and you could pop yourself on, and we could bring you on. Well, I don't say we should or we need to, but here's what I was thinking about, Wyatt, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. This is just between you and me. The rest of you guys, you just mute. But you know, as I go to do more live events, and I do them all the time, you know, I'm a comedian. I don't know if you're aware. Do you know I did stand-up comedy?
No, you're used to sitting down.
No. Well, yeah, but I'm saying when I get out on the road, I do stand-up comedy. I don't sit.
Oh, so is it like the podcast, but you like stand up and stuff?
Kind of. Yeah, no, I just do stand-up comedy.
Oh,
Yeah. I don't know if you knew that. Anyways,
I honestly, I'm surprised. I didn't know you were funny.
well, it is. I'm hysterical. I'm absolutely.
Well, I'll have to see you sometime then.
Well, anyways, well, that's what I was hinting at. So what would happen if, we did some live events of Brad Stine Has Issues. I'm not saying we could do it. What do you call it? Remotely, because I don't think we have the gear for that. We'd have to do a big campaign to buy remote gear. Do you know how much that costs?
It costs money, and unfortunately, that's sort of our bottleneck right now.
All right. Well, here's the deal. I was wondering from you guys out there, do you think that we should, because if you came with me to help me, they'd see you, and the whole gimmick that we, by the way, just to let you know, if you're brand new to Brad Stine Has Issues, this voice that you are hearing, and especially if you're listening in voice only, you can go over to YouTube, Brad Stine Has Issues, and see me, and who wouldn't want to do that? But you'll never see why, because when we first started, it was one camera, and I think a megaphone, I think is all I had, if I'm not, or maybe it was a tin can and a string. I don't remember. I know it was less sophisticated than it is now. And so Wyatt was kind of helping me, my son. He's my son, if you didn't know. And I would say, son, can you help me? Because I got a new camera and an actual microphone. I'm trying to do this a little bit better than I have been when I was sitting it on my laptop. And he came to help me. And next thing I know, I said, I noticed that all the real podcasts, the big boy podcasts, have like people that they talk to. And as somebody who just sat here and just talked, and you know what? I've seen there's been some successful programming. I thought something was missing by me not having somebody to talk to. Why? But here's the deal. The most famous conservative talk show host in history, really the guy that defined and created the genre. And I was gonna say, do you know who it is? And I know you don't. And so it's gonna make you look dumb. And I don't want to do that. So Wyatt, if you were to be forced to come up with the name of the guy that kind of pioneered conservative talk radio, is where he made his name. Very famous, very famous. Passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. Do you know who that is?
Carvel Lincolntosh.
No. I'm glad you tried to give him a patriotic name, but no.
I was trying my hardest.
His first name started with an R. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that it had to be R for you. I'll tell you this. I'll give you a clue.
Okay.
His first name also happens to correlate to your favorite band.
Okay.
Keep going.
Washington.
No. Rush is where it stops. That was his first name, Rush.
Rush Dash?
Limbaugh.
Who names their kid Rush?
Did you ever hear the name Rush Limbaugh?
I have never heard of that name. No.
So that's what I'm saying, guys. All of you baby boomers and Gen X who heard him and listened to him. The first time I ever heard Rush Limbaugh, guys, it would have been in the 1990s. I was on the road doing comedy in what they called the comedy zones. Now, this was a circuit. I think they still exist, but this was a circuit of comedy clubs that were in one-nighters. So literally on a Tuesday night, you might be in a bar in West Virginia, and they shut it down, and they bring you in, and you're doing your gig. And then on Wednesday, you drove somewhere else, and Thursday somewhere else. And then the weekend, Friday and Saturday, would always be like at a Holiday Inn or some hotel, and it was a weekend only, and they had a comedy night there. And they created a whole tour called Comedy Zones. It was also connected to, or not connected to, but in the same vein as Coconuts, which was in Florida, and you could do a bunch of Coconuts, get booked into their circuit and do a bunch of them. Anyways, I was with a feature act. I was the headliner and the feature act, and usually they would drive around and they would drive me, and he listened to Rush Limbaugh. He was a Southern guy. I don't remember his name anymore, but he was Southern, and he listened to Rush Limbaugh. And so he turned me on to it, and I listened to this guy, and I'm like, I like this guy. This guy's pretty good. Well, little did I know that what it was doing was he was basically showing what conservative values meant, what it meant to have a free speech, First Amendment point of view, having the liberties to speak freely, and First Amendment, so forth and so on. So I was kind of getting a primer in a guy that was standing for these values. Well, it blew up because remember, you don't. All of the mainstream media leans left, and now it literally has collapsed into pure leftism, pure progressivism. So there was no place for at that time for a conservative point of view. So he had to go to radio and killed it. I think he started in Kansas City, maybe, or something to that effect. But anyways, just blew up, and they started what do you call it? Syndicating it throughout all these different radio stations, and he became just this monster. Actually, even had his own television radio program for a little bit, and of course he was huge. But so I had heard a rush through that, and then next thing I know, I'm listening to other conservative radio, and here's the thing about conservative. When I go to perform, one of the things I'm very, very clear about, and I tell people about this all the time, is I'm not political, and I feel like political means a very limited bandwidth. Political sounds like you are choosing a Democrat or Republican party and you're lobbying for them or your candidate. And I don't. If you think about it, a Republican and a Democrat or a Libertarian or whoever happens to get voted into Congress or to the Senate, they represent their district, their area, and your vote. You voted for them. So they're supposed to represent the majority's point of view and bring that to the table. So it's a point of view. It's a point of view. Republicans basically latched onto conservative points of view to say, here's who we're going to represent. Now, they don't. You can tell by the way they don't vote. You can tell by the way they don't stand up for values. You can tell by the way they're great at congressional meetings. They're really, really good at having stern meetings where they got you and showed you, FBI director. I'll show you, IRS director. I'll show you, Secret Service director. I'm going to be super stern this time. I hope that's taught you a valuable lesson. And then nothing happens. So to me, it's like a casing, a car casing with no engine, no wheels. It just sits there and looks sleek and cool, but doesn't do anything. And then, of course, Democrats have gleaned onto progressivism, leftism point of view, which, by the way, is Marxism. That's not an indictment against them or a cheap shot. It simply is true. Leftism, far leftism, is Marxism. It just is a philosophical reality of the underpinnings of what it means to be leftist. So I want you to understand that when I say I'm a conservative, what do I want to conserve? Well, the first thing I want to conserve, are you ready for this? Wisdom. The first thing I want to conserve is wisdom. Now, you got to understand something. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before. I've thought of this on my own, but I did hear it through Dennis Prager. So I'll give him props because he figured this out on his own when he was a younger man than me. So I'm not pretending that I don't acknowledge that he has said that he reached this conclusion on his own. And he did. And I'm a big fan of listening to Dennis Prager. But I also reached this on my own. And it's this. The Bible, which is the greatest book in human history, it's the revelation of reality. It literally tells the story of who we are, how we've gotten the way we are, and how we can fix it. It says this, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So if you don't fear God, if you don't believe in God, if you don't trust in God, if you don't think God exists, if you mock God, if you despise God, if you dispense with God, it literally means you cannot be wise. You can be smart, you can be intelligent, you can be educated, you can be proficient, You can be calculating. You can be philosophical. You can be intuitive. You can be creative. You can be communicative. You can be moral. You can be ethical. You can be virtuous. You can be all of these things, but you cannot be wise without God, because God gives substance to the data. God gives substance to your thoughts, and not just that you understand what they mean and what they represent, but how to put them into a cohesive unit that can be utilized to help you through your day-to-day life with a knowledge and a humble understanding that there's something bigger than you that created you, that put everything into place, and you have to be subservient to that being, the greatest being there ever was. And if you do that, you'll begin to have wisdom. Wisdom will be a proper evaluation of the moral structure. It'll be a proper evaluation of the proper place for behaviors and desires that we have as humans. And much of those have to be subsumed. They have to be disciplined. They have to be placed in their proper section. That to believe in God means that there are moral constraints you put upon yourselves. The founders, by the way, said this. The founders said that this nation was created for a religious person and none other. So because we are jettisoning God, and the left has, the Democrats have literally cut him and severed him off of their platform. They don't want to pray about him, think about him, talk about him, honor him. So they have abandoned God. They cannot be wise. Now, how do we know that? Well, you just have to look at what they believe. These are people that believe that you shouldn't be able to, I don't know, decide the type of person that you want to be part of your experience in America. You don't get to decide that. You don't get to have your own moral standards. You don't get to have community standards. They don't believe that you should be able to ever say that some behaviors are wrong. These are postmodernists. They don't believe anything is true. It's simply your point of view. Matter of fact, the only thing they think is true is that there's nothing that is true. Counterintuitive? Yes. Doesn't work at all. Destroys its own foundation? Makes its own belief system obsolete and incoherent? It sure does. Does that sound like a wise way to live your life? No. Why? Because they don't have wisdom. They literally prove they have no wisdom when they say things that don't make sense, that are literally the antithesis of everything we've ever believed about what does it mean to be this, or what does it mean to be that, or can A actually be B if they just choose to believe that. If that's what you think is true, or you can't even define an absolute cup. I can't really define, what does it mean? What's a cup? I don't know. It's kind of whatever you want it to be. That's magic thinking, literally. But it's also certainly a lack of wisdom, because you can't communicate. You can't actually function as a society, because you no longer can land on a specific absolute foundation truth that we all can use as our go-to when we're trying to get somewhere. And if things get off balance or out of sync, or somebody goes sideways, you can always bring them back to true north, because it never changes. That's wisdom. I want to conserve that idea of wisdom, of God. I want to conserve the original intent of the Constitution, not what the left-leaning, Supreme Court tried to do when they said it's a living, breathing document, as in change it when you don't like what it has to say. I want it to go with the original intent, and we have many letters of the founders saying, here's what this means, so that our foundation doesn't crack and crumble. Because if it does, if the house is not built on a rock, which it used to be, it will die. I want to conserve the ability to look at history, draw conclusions, see what was immoral, like slavery, and teach it, but also see who decided to stop slavery. The Christians, William Wilberforce in England, the Quakers here in the United States, and the Christians like Harriet Tubman and Booker T. Washington, who used their faith to end slavery and remember that human beings are made in the image of God. These are the things that I want to conserve. I want to conserve morality, Judeo Christian morality, because that's what the West was built on. If you don't believe in that, yeah, go find something else. Matter of fact, only Christianity and Judaism allows you the ability to be in their atmosphere, disagree with them, believe a different belief system, and they don't execute you, throw you off a building. Other religions do. So this is the beauty of the belief system that Christianity states and Judaism launched. If you're a human being, you're made in the image of God. So you have a dignity, and from that dignity is why we have women's rights, children's rights, human rights, why we have moral absolutes. It all came from the Judeo-Christian ethic that you're made in God's image. So everybody is equal. The peasantry and the monarchy are in equality. So this is wisdom. And that's what I want to conserve. And so I can't be leftism because they don't have God. And without God, they can't have wisdom. So that's what it means to me to be a conservative. And so if you see me at a comedy show, I'm going to talk about conservative ideas within the context of my humor. I'm going to talk about issues that are happening in America because it's crazy and I want to talk about it. But more importantly, I also want to show what free speech look like and the courageous ability to stand for something you believe and speak it out if it costs you everything, because that way somebody has said the emperor is naked. Everybody's read that story or heard that story, and everybody thinks they'd be the little boy that said he's naked, and everybody says, what a brave, amazing young man. We're all going to join in. Would that be you? I don't know. All you have to do is see how you vote, see what you stood for. What did you do for Corona? What did you believe? What did you say? Did you buck against particular ideas, perhaps, that you felt were unconstitutional or stealing your freedom and your agency? Or did you submit to whatever you were told? If you did, thinking you were being virtuous, you proved that you would not have been that little boy. You would have said, what a beautiful, royal, incredible uh, ensemble that the king is wearing. You would have been the people that simply didn't have the courage to speak the truth. You know, when you go to bradstine.com, you can join the Militia of the Mind. That allows you to join a bunch of Christians. It gives me your email so I can give you my newsletters. But if you go to join the Mighty 10,000, it's 10,000 people demanding that I'm going to be a Christian and a disciple and give my life to Christ and be amongst this sort of internet group of Christians who have special access to my comedy, to special answers from guests like Adam Curry, who's about to come up, that only you'll get that answer, and perhaps abilities to come together and come to live events like some of my people have come to see me. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have Wyatt somebody. I don't know, guys. Maybe for our 100th anniversary, do we have something silly and keep up the facade? Or do we go ahead and introduce Wyatt finally and allow him to be on camera? You guys tell me. You are the ones that have come every dang Monday. God bless you. You tell us. You vote. What do you think? A couple of you, just 2 or 3, have ever seen Wyatt, and it's because you deserved it. You know, when Karen Boyd came 3 times to see my show live, I said, here's a picture of Wyatt. You know, when St. Nick Crest came, and brought his shirt and came all by himself. I called Wyatt up on FaceTime, say, here's Wyatt, you got to see him. And let's see, who else? Ashley Haas. Now, it's funny because I knew a mime who got trapped in a box named Ashley Haas, but there was another one who, with her mother, came to see me 3 times. So she, too, actually came to visit the studio, and she got the only one, by the way, who've ever met Wyatt live, face-to-face. And Wyatt was still haunted by that. Son, tell me, do you still think of that moment when one of our people who were simply part of the internet experience became a reality?
Yeah. The nightmares. They don't go away.
Well, it's because suddenly you couldn't hide behind your mic, son. You had to be a real grown-up and talk to a human female face to face. What was it like?
I'd heard stories, tales, if you will. I didn't think they were true. I assumed it was just hyperbole. the stories to tell children when they're misbehaving, to terrify them into behaving. But no, it's real. It was always real. I was too blind to notice until it was right in front of me. By then, I had nowhere else to run. I'm not sure how I made it out. I'm not sure if I did. Maybe I'm still stuck there and I haven't realized yet. Who's to say? Who's to say?
In other words, it was nice to meet Ashley.
Yeah, it was pretty fun all the way around, yeah.
Nice. Well, listen, folks, let me tell you what else is nice. It's you guys showing up every Monday, making it happy. I also am on the road tonight. Tomorrow I'm performing tonight I'm performing in Pennsylvania. I will be with Rick Green on, Wednesday. If you want to go to Patriot Academy, you can come see me in Texas. But folks, this is a very special guest. You know, I'm sitting here with this podcast that most of you helped donate, participate, and help happen. Chris Hammond came down and did his, brought sweat equity. Benjamin Gregory sent donations, as well as so many of you others. But I have to say, it's all here because it's a podcast, and I just fell into it and found that people enjoyed it. So I'm hoping that it continues to grow, It's on Salem Network now, and we never saw that coming when we started. But it all started with some guy's brainchild. What if I was to put this type of format, this type of broadcast on iPods that everybody seems to think is the hot new thing? And sure enough, they just hybridized it into a podcast as opposed to a broadcast. And next thing you know, this gentleman launched what has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, did he get any of those billions? We'll find out on this interview. But if you are an MTV generation, you'll remember Adam Curry as one of the original VJs. I think he was 4 or 5 years in. He has an amazing life, amazing history, amazing connection to things he's done professionally. But also in the last, I think, 2 years, he became something even more important. I'm sure he would agree to. He became a follower of Jesus. So he's one of us. And he invented podcasts. Matter of fact, that's where they came up with the term for him, his moniker, the Podfather. So folks, sit back and relax and hear the story of the beginnings of this format and see if you can take it. As you can see, Wyatt could barely hang on. Please enjoy this episode. God's comic Brad Stine on Brad Stine Has Issues. Oh, and the Podfather himself, Adam Curry. Enjoy. If you would welcome the man known as the Podfather, what does that mean? Adam Curry, how do you do, my brother?
Brad, my brother, so good to be here. Let me just say right off the bat, I'm in the same controversy as you are about age. What I like to say is I am Gen X with boomer tendencies.
Ah, nice, nice.
That's the best way to do it.
Well, you know, I was telling my people a little intro into you. I got to be honest with you, and maybe I don't have the right to do this, but it's my show, so I do whatever I feel like it. But I've never made a big deal about people's intros. And the reason I do that, and it's not because I don't respect, I wouldn't bring anybody on this show that I wasn't interested in what they had to say, that was either more intriguing or deeper than anything I had to say, or just had something to bring to the table I didn't have. I mean, what's the point, right, of bringing somebody on that thinks like you? I mean, I want somebody that has something new and fresh. I've grown up for so many years as a comic, and people would try to intro you. And usually they say, can you give me a bio? And you kind of give them a bio, and you assume they're going to just pick out a bullet point here and there, and they read the frickin' page, and you're like, are you kidding me? They don't care that in 1973, my first, and then I was in who cares? Either he's going to be funny or he's not. Either they know me or they don't. If they know me, the introduction's irrelevant. If they don't give a crap. Just be funny, because we're here for that. So I just kind of, unless there's something very specific, I just kind of let the people kind of describe themselves and kind of create their own foundation for how they want to be seen, because I feel like it just allows us to be a little bit more precise. Go looking at your bio, brother. You've done quite an eclectic amount of things, way beyond what somebody would suspect. And I'm going to be very honest and caricaturish. I didn't look at VJs as high intellectuals when I first came across you guys. I'm thinking these are kind of like, whatever, rocky-ish, drug probably addled, guys that were part of that culture and didn't have a lot of depth, perhaps. And clearly that isn't the case with you. So let's start with this whole, how did you even get involved with MTV as this sort of startup network? How did that even come about?
Well, we got to go back a little bit. And please, like you said with the bio, don't read my Wikipedia because that thing's no good.
Okay.
There's Wikipedia is a mess. From an early age, I was always interested in radio. It got to such a point that when I was 13, I started building my own radio transmitter. And my mom would drive me around the block, see how far my signal would reach. And when we got back to the house, there were a couple of kids there. And I grew up in the Netherlands, just south of Amsterdam. So there was no radio to speak of. It was only government controlled, very socialist broadcast system. There was certainly no popular music or anything like that you could acquire easily. We can get to that later because there were other ways. These kids were there standing saying, hey, we heard your signal. That's pretty cool. So I'm like, oh, well, this is interesting. And I just put on a record, literally a record, a needle on the vinyl, which I'm pretty sure was Elton John's Blue Moves. Not that it was my favorite, but my dad had that album. And so I decided right then and there, I'm going to start doing some kind of radio show with music. And I got another record player and I built a mixer. And then for probably about 2 years, I practiced in my room on my voice. Because I remember the first time, everyone remembers the first time they heard their own voice on a recording. And I went, oh my Lord, I'm a girl. This is no good. So I worked on that and worked on getting my voice low. And I would listen to Wolfman Jack on AFM, which is AFN, which we could get from Radio Luxembourg on on long wave, actually. And I was just fascinated by it, fascinated by theater of the mind. Actually, my grandmother, when I was 7, would give me a little Sony transistor radio, 9-volt. And I would, although I'm not a sports ball guy, I would listen to basketball games. And I loved how the commentators were explaining everything and building a picture. And you could kind of hear in the background, you heard the squeaking of the shoes on the wood, and you could hear the backboard. And like, that was just really fascinating to me. I always was kind of along that track of both the technology of radio and the production of radio programming, to the point where when I was 15, there was a hospital radio station that was looking for volunteers. And it was a closed circuit radio station, very captive audience. And they were looking for hosts and engineers. I was not accepted as a host, but I was as an engineer. So I had the key and I had full-time access to a professional studio. And I really was just in there after school, anytime I could get in, practicing. I just loved it. And then I got involved in pirate radio in Amsterdam because, when there's an audience demand, all of a sudden supply is created. And there were these ragtag bunch of guys in Amsterdam, and they had an old army radio transmitter. They had converted to FM. It was called Decibel Radio. And we had a connection with an import record store in Amsterdam. And they were getting 12 inches from Chicago warehouse stuff. I mean, Madonna, this is 1981 when she first released the Borderline stuff, with Holiday, and later was re-released and then actually went somewhere. I loved it so much. And, we were very local. We were very involved in the community, just how everything worked on radio. I loved everything about it. And you didn't have to, do your hair. So that was easy. And then I was called by a broadcast organization who had a couple hours a week on radio and 1 hour on television in Holland. And they said, well, we'd like you to host this television show called Countdown. And it was an hour-long show live. And so with only 2 stations, half the country would watch it. But because I was fluent in English, I was always able to have easy conversations with the artists. And the Netherlands at the time was kind of the gateway to Europe for everything, including culture and music. So everyone would come through there. Everyone would play concerts. So in the early 80s to mid 80s, I talked to everybody. You can't mention someone that wasn't a superstar at the time that I didn't have on the show. And I mean, it was mind boggling to be doing that. And then MTV in 86 literally just called me and said, "You want to come work for us?" I'm like, "In New York?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "See you in 2 months." And that's how I got started.
Wow. First off, to show my ethnocentric idiocy, Netherlands, is that referencing a group of countries specifically, like Finland and whatever, Dutchland, or I mean, that's again, I'm an idiot. So the Netherlands, what would you call yourself if you're from that area?
You would call yourself Dutch. The
Dutch.
Netherlands literally means the lowlands. It is a country, exists of several provinces. It is mostly reclaimed land. It's an amazing country. At the time, it only had 11 million inhabitants. Now it's up to, I think, 17. You would probably know it as Holland, which is it's kind of a misnomer because you have North Holland, South Holland, but the Netherlands is really the whole country. It is, in fact, the place where in 1608 the Pilgrims went from England to Holland. They were in Amsterdam first and later in Leiden, and they were there for a couple of years before they set out. So a lot of influence of America and the American church really came from the Dutch.
Indeed. Well, and then of course the Pennsylvania Dutch, those who
Yep.
became
Oh,
Amish. and
Harlem. I mean, even the Harlem is Harlem. There's all kinds of Dutchisms everywhere. Peter Stuyvesant, Peter Stuyvesant, he actually sold New York for a pack of cigarettes, I guess. I don't know what it was. So
a hookah
Dutch,
pipe. You're from there originally, or you grew up there?
No, I was born in D.C. Parents worked for the government. So we moved around a bit. The first 3 years of my life I spent in Uganda. I don't remember much of it, but
Well, who
I do
didn't?
yeah, Uganda, and then Idi Amin started coming in, and we're like, well, time to go. So we left and went back, and then they were sent to the Netherlands. We were supposed to only be there for 3 years. So I went to the International School of Amsterdam, and that was just all English. I did get Dutch and French and some German lessons. And then by the time 5th grade came around, my parents were like, we want to stay here. And even though he won't be working for, the same companies. So they decided they liked it. And I entered Dutch school in 5th grade, speaking very little Dutch, certainly not at a 5th grade level. So that was a bit of a shocker, but in hindsight, of course, fantastic.
So obviously you speak Dutch fluently now.
Yes.
You seem to travel back there. I guess you have your daughter perhaps lives there, or maybe visits or something.
My daughter, my sister, one of my sisters lives there. Of course, I lived there really until I left in 86. So I have a lot of friends and family and infrastructure from back there. And my daughter lives there. She wanted to be close to her mom, my ex-wife, so who was Dutch. It's really a nice place to visit. You wouldn't want to live there, but it's a nice place to visit.
I wouldn't want to live there because of the socialist aspect of it, or what?
Yeah, in general, I think, I witnessed firsthand the whole European Union formation, and that really, really screwed up a lot. I mean, you think we have problems with, we're an immigration country. The Netherlands is not an immigration country, but it is now. And that integration has been anything but good.
I think it's a misnomer to call it immigration, because immigration sort of came with this assumption that you assimilated, that you came with a sense of desire to be part of this nation. You chose. It's not like you were exiled. It's not like you were removed from a British prison and sent to Australia to populate. You wanted to go. And so you were hopefully bringing something of value to this culture, an upside to it, which is where immigration is in fact necessary. The United States would never have been great had it not had all of the immigrants, obviously, because it started with British, right? The Pilgrims. So it had to be people from other cultures coming there, but they brought the best of their culture, older culture, certainly than the US, and they brought the best of it. But then they said, but now we're going to be this other thing. And that's what made the United States so unique. It was built on a creed that had never happened before, and that it was going to literally see if a republic and a constitutional republic could actually work. It was a theorized idea. Certainly, we talked about democracy in Greece, but a pure democracy is the other thing the founders didn't want, because then it's mob rule. Whoever has the most numbers wins, and that can be bad people. Look at Nazi Germany, so the easy go-to reference that. But I just was curious about this Netherlands connection, because it just seemed way out of left field that that would be kind of your foundational experience in radio and in the arts, and then suddenly you're in the US. Usually it doesn't work like that, that they go find a European to come
Right.
to the US. It's all those guys trying to make it in the US. So clearly you were at the right place at the right time. You had this interest. You clearly were good at it. You had already made a way for yourself by being on a show that revealed that you're good at this and you have the goods. So you were kind of like your audition was already established, and they were able to, what were they looking around like this is a new concept? And so who do you think should fill this bill? Should we just go find well-known DJs and see if they can transition into being a personality on camera? Were they kind of doing a talent search at that time, or how'd they stumble upon you if you were only in the Netherlands being seen?
Well, yes to all of the above. And a slight correction, I wasn't one of the original VJs.
Okay.
MTV started August 1st, 1981,
Okay.
with Mark, Alan, Martha, JJ, Nina. By the time I came in, so 86, 87, they were indeed looking to refresh the channel. And you have to understand that MTV was such a phenomenally new concept on something that people didn't even believe in the industry. Cable, that's not television. No one's going to advertise on that. It's never going to work. But MTV had just gone to basic cable, and that meant that there were now 40 million households that could view MTV. There was always a change in management at MTV. So it was really radio guys who started it. And they just said, well, it's just radio with pictures, and we know how to do that. When it went to basic cable, and it was at that time also sold from the American Express company to Viacom. And Viacom is a very traditional media company. So they understood they needed to do something different. And even throughout the 7.5 years I was there, I mean, I saw so many people come and go. There were so many changes to the formats and how things were done. So they were indeed looking around, and they found Julie Brown in the UK, Wubba Wubba Wubba, downtown Julie Brown. She was hosting, I think she was actually a dancer on Top of the Pops, but she had a perfect club vibe. They were looking for kind of this is the days of, Bon Jovi on one hand, but also Europe, the Final Countdown. So I had that look, but I could also speak English. Although I never made one and never sent anything to them, I had a great sizzle reel, if you think about it. Saw the people I had interviewed.
Yeah.
They even went for, we need a girl next door. We need someone earthy. So that was Carolyn Heldman, and she was from Colorado, and she was, an earthy kind of girl next door. And then they did a college recruitment, and they came up with a guy not many people remember, Kevin Seal. He was one of the most naturally funny, insane guys I've ever met. Not a lot of people understood him. So that was kind of the new wave that they brought in. Along with that, they had guest spots. In fact, a lot of comedians came on to do guest shows, which later led to the half-hour comedy hour. Dweezil and Moon Unit Zappa, who would come in to guest host. China Phillips, Cantner's daughter. So they were really trying to put something together. And they actually saw me because what I was doing in the Netherlands, we then spun out to one of the first global satellite stations called Europa Television, cable stations all around Europe. And that's how they saw me, and like, oh yeah, let's bring that guy in. So that was literally how it happened.
Were they intentional, it sounds like, about international personalities? Because
Yeah.
why? They felt like that would maybe reach a global audience, or they just felt it would be exotic to do that?
Yeah, I think that was part of it, and I'm kind of a hybrid. I look like I could be in a American hair band, but I also had some weird pronunciations like video. They're like, you don't say it's video. I say video, and I saw a little thing, and I guess they like that. Someone was smart, obviously.
So you're saying that then basically any band that was touring Europe, trying to build marketing and promotion for the tour, go to any, obviously, to television or radio, so powerhouses of the area, and you were one of those. So you basically were interviewing bands that were on tour in Europe.
Oh yeah, and you have to understand that although the Dutch speak very, very good English these days, and that's mainly because they have subtitles on everything, so that you can read the Dutch and listen to the English. But at the time, if you had Mick Jagger in the studio, a typical, even from like the so-called sophisticated interview programs, the questions would be something in line of, "Oh, Mick, can you tell me where goes this song about?" That's not something Mick Jagger is going to get turned on by,
Right.
versus me saying, "Yo, Mick, did your kids listen to this album?
Yeah.
What did they think of it?" And his answer was, they hate it. They think it's crap. So Grace Jones, Tina Turner, Diana Ross, all the Jacksons, you name it, they all came through at some point. It was actually Sammy Hagar somewhere around 85, I think. And he said, and maybe it had something to do with it, I don't know, but he said, dude, this thing MTV, you should be on there. You should talk to those guys, which I didn't. But then whatever happened, they came to me.
But you say that the Dutch would be very simplistic and almost
At the time,
formulaic in the way they would interview the guys, like a list, apparently. Is it because of they were trying to stumble through English and so it was fairly simplistic? Or do you feel like there wasn't an artistic sophistication as to trying to really examine an artist and intrigue people who are actually interested in artists to know who they really are? I mean, I guess maybe I'm giving you a lot of credit for having that kind of ingenuity that let's take this deeper. Or do you feel like because your command of English, you simply could be more sophisticated in your questions?
So kind of three things. So yes, the command of the English language hampered them. Two, it's a socialist country. So there was really the idea that only the elitist journalists could have a sit down, which most bands on tour don't really want to sit down for 2 hours and talk to a journalist for a written piece. And I think there's also fear, because small little country, look at this huge megastar, America was still like, whoa, the land of Coca-Cola and Nike and Disneyland, and look at these guys, even though Stone's a bad example for that, but this is where they're coming in from. And for me, although I honed my interviewing skills over time, I was populist conversationalist. I would just put out, look, I know these guys have been on tour. They've talked to all kinds of people who are just going down the list of asking the questions that someone on the editorial team put together. And I would ask the questions, but as a part of a conversation. So I could literally say, well, what do you think of the country? What do you think of our Dutch? What do you think of the Dutch girls? I could start that way and then said, so what is this song about actually? What frame of mind were you in when you wrote it? I would have an editorial team who would say, here's the things you want to hit. I just brought it in a conversation. And over time, I just created my own style. And I found out that these people are human and I could have good laughs. I mean, there's some great stuff I did with Tina Turner. Grace Jones actually put me on the map when I just made her crack up and we were just having fun. And that kind of lowered this celebrity veil a little bit.
Yeah, but you had to have an instinct that this was appropriate, that it was going to be received well, that they weren't going to like, who's this guy? Clearly, they appreciated it. It tells more about your personality. I mean, your interest in technology, the fact that you said you were a young kid and you figured out how to make a radio, and so you had an instinct, obviously, about your personality to even presume that there was a deeper conversation to be had here with these guys, and they have the cojones to do that and have them go, who is this Dutch kid asking me? So there was something interesting about your personality is what I'm getting at, that I think is allowed you to become what you've become in your life is what I'm getting at, I guess.
I was doing this television show when I was 19, and I had during the pirate radio days, I graduated from Dutch high school, my family have degrees. They're either in military or intelligence or other very impressive types of occupations. And so when I went to study communications, I wanted a school where I could be on the radio as a freshman, which is not, the BU doesn't allow you to do that. And I found Salem College in Salem, West Virginia, which was great because I was running the radio station within a month. But then I looked around, I'm like, what are you guys doing? This smoking weed and drinking? It's like, I come from Amsterdam. This isn't, we've done this. We did that when we were 13.
That ain't weed. I know what weed is.
Let me show you what weed is, bro. And so I dropped out and, right. To much shame of the family. And I literally had a fait accompli from my parents. They said, you come back within a month, either you're back in school or you have a job and you're paying rent or you're out. I think that drove me is kind of I'm going to show them attitude. Of course, what did I have to lose? I had already been on the radio and had communication skills, and I knew how to speak to people. So I think it was a combination of all of those things. And honestly, Brad, about 2 years now, I know where it really came from. Yeah, it was a plan that was laid out for me, long time before I was born.
Right, and that could theoretically, from people watching or listening, seem contrived, like we're trying to bait and switch. And here comes the
Here
God
comes
stuff.
the Jesus talk.
Yeah, here we go. I knew it. I thought this would be an interesting. This dude that was a groundbreaker in music, television, and podcasting, and suddenly, it has to be that. But the truth is, in the end, and especially in the wake of what this Earth has become, and I mean Earth. I don't mean I mean the West is the easy go-to because I'm Western and you are as well, and European to a degree, or certainly influenced that way.
Sure.
But what is happening on this earth is interesting in that I see a lot of secular people, Jordan Peterson's, let's say, who's expounding on the power and the necessary component of the Bible as a revelatory means of seeing the world for what as it actually is. Old wisdom, deep wisdom, something that is beyond simple storytelling. There's something more here. And it's coming from a non-Christian, and then suddenly Joe Rogan, who was pretty adamant, hedonistic atheist, comic, suddenly going something, maybe this Jesus needs to be reconsidered. I think when it's fascinating to see the spiritual realm is becoming so clear to people who didn't even think one of that could even exist, that something is afoot on earth, something deeply old, a story is coming to a conclusion, perhaps, that has been foretold for a long time. And so, yeah, there is providence, there is sovereignty, there is a plan in everybody's life, whether you knew it or not, that you can't get away from. This was your lot in life. And we're going to get into that, Adam, but I don't want to skip over some of the other attributes of yours because they're so interesting, and I don't know enough about them. So I'm actually going to find out in real time. So I'm going to start with this, though, and I will be honest. I cheated. I did go to Wikipedia.
That's all right, brother.
And I know what you mean, because I got, I have my own Wikipedia page, which I did not have anything to do with. I don't know.
No, das ist verboten. You're not allowed to do it yourself.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Well, I don't know how it works. I am a techno idiot as opposed to you. So I don't know how. I mean, literally, I stumbled upon it. Go, what is Wikipedia? Why am I in this? Who wrote this? How do they know? Who's got this dossier on my life? This is creepy. And some of it was a little erroneous and a little like, that isn't true. How'd they come up with that? Anyways, but one of the things they said, and I wanted to validate this because this is pretty amazing to me, was that you in 93, so they're very specific, so you can let me know how off they are, registered mtv.com. So basically you bought the IP address, I guess. Is that what you would call
domain
it?
Domain
name of MTV. I laugh, because that's a fairly sophisticated move on your part, but to show how oblivious people were to what the internet was going to become and the power of the internet, to them to run this station or this program for 10 years and not think, you might want to protect your name, is just so like crazy to me that they wouldn't think. So they clearly didn't see the monetary coming soon of the internet and owning your domain name and monetizing the internet and whatnot. So how did you have the wherewithal to know that a name could be basically owned, to go do it? What made you even think of that?
The full story is even funnier. This never shows up on Wikipedia, the full story. So when I moved to New York to be at MTV, now I had stayed away from video games. Someone would give me, when I was in Holland, say, oh, look at this cool video game. And I looked at it and was like, I need to put this away in the closet because I will become a nutcase. I will just be playing this video game. I won't do anything else. But I was very interested in online networks. In fact, my dad had showed me very early versions of CompuServe. And I thought that was just fascinating how people could communicate with each other, all text-based. So I had promised myself that when I got to New York, I would buy a computer and I would find out about I would use every online resource I had possible, really for research and just to be able to talk to people around the country, et cetera, and have more information than the other guy that I could
Essentially, you're discovering the internet.
So at the time, I was we had AOL, so America Online, had just come up. and I had a Mac Plus with a huge 20 megabyte, not gigabyte, megabyte external hard drive with a big scuzzy plug, so I had a modem, and I was on America Online, and I kept hearing about this internet, and people said, oh man, it's really hard to get on, but all the cool kids are there. So I dove in and I figured it out, and I got into the internet, which there was no web browser, it was all text based. And first you had email. That was really interesting. So you could send and receive email. There's this great around 96, I think, of the NBC Today show, and they're talking about, oh, you can now email us through this electronic mail, and they couldn't. And so I'd already been doing this for a couple of years at that point. There was this other program called Gopher, Gopher, and it was developed by the University of Minnesota. And it was really cool because you could have a menu. There's a text-based menu, and you just start somewhere, and you could say, okay, I'm interested in this folder or this document, and you click on it, and you were actually connecting to another computer somewhere else where they had another directory. So it's kind of like surfing through a directory of folders and documents. And like, that is really cool. You can publish something. Remember, I'm a broadcaster. I need to set one of these up. So I learned a little bit of Unix programming, learned how to set up a Gopher server, found a company that actually leased me a small server in Reston, Virginia. These were a bunch of radical guys at a company called Digex. They were above a Chinese restaurant, and they were trying to figure this internet thing out as well. And Robert Seastrom, who was my contact there, he says, you need a domain name. And I said, what do you mean? Well, something.com or whatever. I said, well, why don't we do mtv.com? He said, okay, you emailed this guy. So it was no purchase at the time. You literally emailed the guy who maintained the registry, and he emailed you back a day or two later. Said, okay, you're good to go. Here's your proof that you own the domain name. I also then got curry.com, elvis.com. I got a whole bunch of fun domain names.
Elvis.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Dude.
I had elvis.com, sure.
That would be, I mean, again, maybe there is a sad ending to this, but
no, it's a good ending.
Smoke, that would make you a millionaire by just owning that alone. Holy crap. I can't wait to hear this. Go ahead.
And actually set up king@elvis.com, and people would email that all the time. Like, hey, King, I saw you here. You are the king. I hope you're alive. And I'd never responded, but I have them somewhere. I saved thousands of emails because it was in all directories. Back in the day, you could go to the bookstore and you could get the internet yellow pages, and they would have internet addresses you could visit. They actually thought that they could publish a yellow pages of the internet. How foolish. I had mtv.com, and I was just publishing stuff. I call it cyber sleaze. So, I just write a little blurb about something that happened, because who else was on the internet were college kids, because they had access to the big computers. Interestingly, not counted in the Nielsen ratings at the time, but they had access to the computers. So it was nerds probably. And so I started experimenting with stuff like I'd do a poll while the top 20 countdown was running, which I hosted. I'd say, okay, what do you think of this song? And of course, what was the top 10 on MTV in no way reflected what people at colleges thought it should be. So I would kind of interweave that, and I would solicit email on air, adam@mtv.com. And then I got
you're still on MTV at this time?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So you were literally using this to get some data information and be a little bit more savvy as to what your viewers might be interested in.
Yeah. And honestly, I thought it was cool. And the people who watch me are like, oh, this guy's cool. I'm at college. I'm stoned. I'm watching MTV. I'll fire off an email. Then I got an email from a guy who was at college at Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. And he said, check this out. We just developed this thing. I got this little HTTP server, and it works with this thing called Mosaic. That was Mark Andreessen, who later went on to create Netscape and is now one of the largest venture capitalist investors. And so I set up a website. And now, people, now the internet, it's starting to gain traction. People are hearing about it. MTV comes to me, the lawyers, and they say, what are you doing with this? I say, I'm just using it, just to write and feedback. I'm not, commercializing it in any way. And they said, that's okay. You go ahead and use that, because we've already secured the AOL keyword. So we don't have to worry about the internet. I don't know if you remember keywords. But on AOL, you could have a keyword and you type that in, it would go straight. So you type in MTV, it would go straight to the AOL.com, or actually the AOL keyword page. So they let me use it. I literally just use it for, just use it for fun and games. In fact, what was interesting is that when I had the Gopher server, the University of Minnesota emailed me and said, hey, this program was developed at the University of Minnesota, and you're using it on a commercial network, so you have to pay us a $5,000 license. I'm like, first of all, I'm just a dude. I'm not using it commercially. I don't have $5,000, but we agreed that if I would wear a University of Minnesota Gopher t-shirt on MTV, they would waive the license fee. And there's a video of me on YouTube wearing the big Gopher t-shirt.
Perpetuity, they would waive it?
Yeah, yeah. As this passion grew, as I saw more and more it was happening, I said to myself, I got to do this full time. I have to be, this internet is where it's going. I want to broadcast here. I'm not sure how it works. The web is kind of broadcasting. I had saved up enough money at least for about a year to live without running into too much trouble. And I was driving into MTV one day from Jersey. I'd moved out to Jersey at the time, driving in, beautiful, beautiful day, and these blue sky days before the chemtrails. And you'd be driving into the tunnel and like, today's the day. And I did the top 20 countdown, did number one. And after number one, which was Beck, Loser, I said, you know what? This is my last show on MTV. I'm leaving. I see the future on the internet, and I hope to see you there. And I left, and I walked out and never came back. And walked right over to my partners in my radio business. I had a syndicated radio show at the time. Two guys who really taught me business, Gary Schoenfeld and Ron Hartenbaum, two of the best New York Jews in the business, who taught me business. I'm telling you,
there's no Jew like a New York Jew, my brother.
I'm telling you. And we go home early on Fridays. Yeah. And I said, look, I want to start this business. They said, we're going to start with you. Now, here's what happened subsequently. 2 weeks later, I got a knock on the door Saturday morning, and I was served with papers. MTV was suing me over the domain name mtv.com, which they had said I could use. Now, they sued me under the Lanham Act, and I have a lot of experience with this now, which says if there could ever be any consumer confusion over a trademark name, over a name, then that's a problem. And of course, if they had just asked me, Brad, I would have given it to them and asked, maybe can I have adam@curry.com as an email address? And I was so upset by what they had done that I countersued them. With my partners, they really pitched in big time and helped on that. It really said jurisprudence. It was probably, I think it was the first domain name dispute. We went back and forth, and I, of course, had the media on my side. The New York Post put a nice David and Goliath headline. It was funny that it was that as well. And we eventually settled out of court. And so that was good. And I started my first company called OnRamp. What's interesting, going back to the domain names, now curry.com I still have, which of course there's almost no money I can think of I would give it up for. It's tied to my identity. But then I got a call from Lisa Marie Presley. Hey, you've got Elvis.com. Do you think we could have that? And I said, you know what, Lisa Marie, because you asked me, absolutely. I gave it to her.
Wow. So you are either the kindest, most philanthropic, altruistic guy, or you're the dumbest person I have ever
Yes
interviewed.
To both. Yes to both.
Well, God bless you, man, for having that kind of a kind spirit, because I mean, honestly, that name was worth millions, literally. I mean, if for nothing else to say, yeah, I mean, you're going to have to buy it from me because I had the wherewithal to buy this and purchase it.
It's because she asked me, Brad. She just asked. She just asked me. I'm like, what? The settlement was okay with MTV.com. I was able to start my business. I didn't want, another lawsuit. I can also see, Elvis is a very protected name. And she asked me, I'm like, wow, you found me, you called me up and asked me for that. So yes, I'll give that to you.
In a perfect world, that was a very kind, beautiful thing to do. I'm just saying, from a business standpoint, clearly it wasn't prudent. But so what? I mean, but again, you weren't a believer at that time. You weren't a Christian, no. I don't think. So it's not like you had this sort of higher transcendent moral structure to say, you know what, I think that would be
not consciously, no.
Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah. But I'm just saying that, I mean, here I am, and I am a Christian. I do believe in morality and ethics and so forth. And here I'm wrestling with, I don't know if I would have just not said, I'm sorry, but can we work out a deal? Because because I, it's like having a copyright on something and somebody says, you know what, we've been building this for a while. Can we just have that? It's like, kind of, no, you can't. So, I mean, I'm intrigued by myself as I'm speaking, thinking to myself from a business standpoint, maybe you didn't do anything wrong.
I think it was part of it, Brad, was because MTV went straight to suing me. And I knew that if they had asked me, I would have given it. I felt this was kind of, let me put my money where my mouth is. My parents, although not Christians, although both raised, I think, with some Christianity in them, for a while they were Unitarians, which did not work for the kids. They always said, we just want to make sure you know right from wrong, which ultimately is a lot of the basis. I didn't have to think about it. I'm like, yeah, you asked me. Yeah, if MTV had asked me, I would have given it. You asked me, I'm going to give it.
Well, like I said, I'm not trying to argue. I think that was a cool thing to do. If I really think it through, though, these guys that began when this whole internet began to really become clearly a gold mine, potentially for domain names, for monetizing content, and when it really started becoming what it's become, a juggernaut that has overtaken and proven that we no longer need record labels to have a monopoly over what artist gets to create his album. I can make my own album now, and I can market my own album without you. So what it has become, and the fact that it's been able to circumvent control over a special elite over artists' content, I think is beautiful because it gave us options we never had before. A guy like me, Adam, who came out years ago and said, I'm a Christian conservative. I see what's happening in my country, and I'm going to be a comic. That's my flavor, but I'm going to talk about things that I think are important. Cost me my career in the mainstream. I'm not going to be on. I'm not going to be on Jimmy Fallon. I'll never be on. I'm not going to get a Netflix special. I can't, because those who control dissemination of information and the control access to even how people are viewed, propaganda basically hate me and what I believe. They hate Jesus, so they're going to hate me. They have to.
Which means you're blessed, brother.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, that being said, there is a cost for standing up for what it is that you believe is true and more important. But in that regard, I've seen people who, I guess, had the foresight. Again, this is it's tricky because I do believe in capitalism, and I do believe in entrepreneurship. I don't think there's something intrinsically evil about trying to make money off of an idea. But these guys that began to hoard and buy domain names so they could resell them at exorbitant prices does have some ethical implications, I think, because they would take people's names, and clearly it was not theirs. It really, you shouldn't be able to just take my name, Elvis, who has a brand, has a track record, I have established the brand that makes that name valuable. So even though you got in front of me, the value is what I've already established historically. So how can you then just take this from me? It seems like that would seem, forget unethical, it would almost seem legally incoherent, because the value of the name came but with something you had nothing to do with. So I would think legally that would be how you would win the argument. I don't know. I don't know anything about illegal, but I'm just curious because as an artist, I know what it's like to have your name, your brand stolen. People that would put out content of my back catalog of content and get money on views. I didn't know any of that was happening for years. I'm a baby boomer, man. I'm stupid about. I have to reverse engineer my career because Twitter, social media, and all that stuff that is the only way you can survive and communicate nowadays came long after I was doing it old school with albums and CDs and selling it out of the back of your truck.
And merch.
Yeah, merch. So people have made money off of my product is what I'm getting at, that I had no control because I didn't know how to protect myself. So I see both sides of it is all I'm getting at. Anyways, it was kind that you did that. I still think you should have asked for a point Could I get a residual point from Elvis for 1% from now on? But that's me.
I'm going to see Elvis one day and he's going to go, hey, that was cool, brother. So that'll be my reward there.
No, absolutely. So we've gone through MTV a little bit. We've got and how you sort of were cutting edge of this whole technology or whatever. And one of the things that obviously I really wanted to go deeper in was this moniker that you were given. I don't know who gave it to you, the Podfather. But essentially, the way it's been framed, and I'm sure you'll illuminate it a little bit more succinctly, is you basically either created the concept of a podcast, or at least were one of the first to give it popularity, to give it impetus. I don't know. So you tell me the story. How did you get the name Podfather?
Just a quick interim step that we don't have to dive into, but when I started my company, we started building big entertainment websites for Anheuser-Busch, for Budweiser. Interestingly, just as we're talking about it, there was some true lover of Budweiser who had bud.com. And here's your kismet, or whatever you want to call it. So Anheuser-Busch said, hey, we really want that bud.com domain name. And so I called this guy up and I said, hey, look, I'm contracted for Budweiser. They really want the domain name. What can we do? And the guy said, you know what? If you can give me 12 cases of long necks and have one of them signed by Augustus Bush the third, you got a deal. So, so that's how that went. But, I did Planet Reebok. We put Continental Airlines on the web. And then in 96, we took it public. So I also ran a public company for a couple of years. And by 99, I was very tired of wearing suits, doing, reporting our numbers. We had 450 people. It was a big company. And I was running the New York office and I was chief technology officer. And so I decided I wanted to go back to Europe. My wife then at the time was Dutch. And I said, let's just go chill out and see what happens. So I did have some cash and went back and bought a castle, bought helicopters, burned all the money in the air. It was a great time. I don't regret a minute of it. And so at one point, I'm sitting in the castle there. And now this is early 2000, and blogging had just kind of started. And this was done through a technology called RSS, which is, it's everywhere, but no one sees it. It's hidden. It's under the covers. And that was created by a guy named Dave Weiner, who had actually met during these internet public company days. And the idea was that you would have a piece of software that you could subscribe to weblogs, and then you could just fire that up. Instead of going to each individual website independently, you could have a whole list of all of the stories. And not long after that, Google when Google came around, created the Google Reader. That's why a lot of people may remember it from that. You could search for a blog, you could subscribe to it, and right there, you'd just be, all of the web blogs were in there. So he had this piece of software, which worked, I think at the time, only on Mac, called Radio Userland. Well, that got my attention. Like, yeah, this is kind of like radio, where you have your RSS feed is your broadcast signal, and then you have this receiver side, which is what we call an aggregator, and it could receive all of these signals. And you almost made like your own little radio playout system in text. I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could attach a file to one of those posts, kind of like you attach to an email, and it would solve something really big, because we didn't have big bandwidth at the time. It was dial-up. There was no experience. If you wanted to watch a video, which at the time was 1 frame a second, or listen to a song, or around that time also Napster came out, and you know how long it took to download an MP3 file. It took forever. So there was no experience, and especially a radio program would be too long, the file would be too big. But I thought if we could defer that downloading process to overnight, so this little piece of software on your computer, we actually had cable modems at the time, so they were always on. And it could be looking to see if there's a file for you to download. Then it would download it, and you wouldn't even know about it until it said, hey, I got a new file for you, because it was already downloaded. So that was just my broadcast mind thinking about deferring, shifting time, really. And so I flew to New York, and I convinced Dave, took me a little bit, convinced him to add that, and he did. And for actually about 3 years, we were the only people using it. And we'd send, files back and forth. He would send me a Grateful Dead song, which he was into, and I'd send him some kind of whacked out video. Because, he was in California, I was in Belgium at the time, in the castle. And, I would wake up in the morning and there would be, a song that Dave had put there. And I thought that was pretty cool. It was like, hey, there's no clicking and waiting. It was good. And it wasn't until a friend of mine showed me her iPod. I'm like, whoa, this is not a digital Walkman. This is not a jukebox. This is just like that little transistor radio my grandmother gave me when I was 7 years old. This is a radio receiver. So I went about it with my very hackish skills to create. Apple had this little programming language you could use called Apple Script. They still have it, but very obscure, poorly documented. And I was able to create a script that would look for a file in an RSS feed that I subscribed to, would identify a new one, would download it to the computer. Back then you had to synchronize your iPod to your computer. And then the minute it did that, it would trigger a sync. And then in the morning, the same process would have happened. I had a new file, but now it was on my iPod, and it was under a heading, just like an album, but it was basically a show. And I thought, wow, this is it. So I started my own show. We didn't have the word podcast at the time, called The Daily Source Code. And that was chosen very specifically because I knew that I was not a programmer, but if I used the term source code, that would attract software developers who work in source code all the time, and it would be daily. Why was it daily? Because I know that if you're working on some software, you need something to test against. So they needed a new, fresh episode of something every single day. And what better than for that thing to be a program where I was talking about them? Like, oh, Andrew Grummett just did, and these guys just did this. And we learned a whole bunch of things. And it took off. It was amazing. People started creating their own programs, putting them on blog feeds, basically. In fact, we called it audio blogging and all different kinds of terms. Then some guy came along and said, hey, let's call this podcast. Like, okay. Now, there's many people who claim the name podcast doesn't really matter. It's not the best name in hindsight because of the iPod, etc. But what was great is the people who got it were the public broadcasters. So NPR, a guy named Tony Khan at WGBH in Boston, he got it right away. He's like, oh, look at all this programming we have that we can't air. So he started putting some of their programs and even some programs that weren't on the radio, started putting them onto podcasting. The BBC, they jumped in very early. They got it right away. Also a public broadcaster. And so I started to get interviews, and I was like, well, yeah, sure, I'll show up. And so I was on NPR interviews, BBC interviews. And I think it was the New York Times actually that put in the headline, the Podfather, on some article. Because, of course, my story was compelling. I left MTV, I went into the internet, and then here I am revolutionizing podcast radio, in effect. And then in 2005, I got a call from Steve Jobs, and he says, do you have a little time to talk with me? Maybe Thursday afternoon, I can find a spot for you, Steve. Right. And so, of course, I went to San Diego, where he was at a conference, and he gave me a full hour, just the two of us, and which was mind-boggling. At this point, I'd interviewed and met a lot of people, but Steve Jobs up there on the list with Quincy Jones and just some fascinating people. I noticed a whole bunch of things, like he has a slight lisp, which I'd never noticed. He was much taller than I thought. He was also very mad. And I thought to myself, man, you should calm down, because that's going to make you sick, being so mad. He was mad about what they had done with Wi-Fi. And we didn't have the iPhone at this point. It didn't exist. So we're in this meeting, we're talking. He's like, and he was asking me, like, what did I need? What did podcasters need? What kind of equipment? What kind of software? And he got it, because he said, Adam, I want to build radios for you. I still get goosebumps when I hear it. I'm like, wow, you really do get it. So yeah, I want to turn the iPods into radios for you. And is that okay? What? Yeah, of course it's okay. This was all built open source. So there's, again, no patent. Dave Wine and I knew that if you try to patent this and protect it, that it would never gain traction. So the whole point, and it had to be open, otherwise it would never work. Just like the free ether, the free airways, which of course is licensed and you can't just use it. I mean, for me, it was like, wow, now I can do radio shows, and there's no program director who's going to hotline me and tell me I said something I shouldn't. There's no top of the hour I got to hit, no commercial breaks, no news I have to worry about. I can talk for as long as I want. I can do whatever I want. And I was super excited about that. And literally, that's when I think podcasting came into, at the time, iTunes and the iPod. that's when it just went bananas. And I had one follow-up email with Steve after that, and he said, because at the time I thought maybe we can do an advertising model for this, and he emailed me, said, I think that's a good idea. I think you should start a company to do that, and I'm going to suggest this to Klein and Perkins and Sequoia Capital, which are like some of the biggest premier venture capital firms. And subsequently, I did that and started a podcast network, which is has a whole nother history behind it. But that's really how the name Podfather came about and how podcasting was born. So it's not just me. I happen to be the guy who much later. I've only been saved for 2 years, Brad. Only now do I understand. Here we go, people. Jesus alert. Now do I understand what the hip hop guys, when they would win a video music award, most of them would say, first and foremost, I want to thank God, my creator. And that's where this came from, clearly. And there's a setup. The whole path was set up all the way to this. And I had the wherewithal to bring in other people. So it was really built on the shoulders of other giants and many people around me. I became the figurehead and propagated that. That's the story of podcasting.
But that's like saying, well, that's the story of landing on the moon. I mean, you know, it's
Did we, Brad? Did we?
right. But my point is that, you know, you're downplaying the significance, and I mean, I know you're not. You know your piece of the puzzle, and you're not trying to sort of lay claim to it was all me and nothing. I get it. Obviously, there's lots of moving parts and lots of people doing innovations and this and that made it all come together. And you happen to be the guy that sort of culmination of all this technology that they could say, that's how it landed. That's what it looked like. Let's just use him. And you deserve it, though, because you saw things. Certainly, as you know, you talk about Steve Jobs. I mean, Bill Burr, you know, is a comic you might be familiar with.
Of course.
He has a bit of a different worldview than me, and certainly
Sometimes he goes back. He slides into dimension A and dimension B. Yeah, I feel so.
He definitely has different nomenclature choices than me,
Yes.
but nevertheless, he's pretty insightful. And I remember him doing a joke about Steve Jobs on a panel on Fallon or something. And he's like, you know, I don't remember how they set it up. It was something to the effect of, you know, Steve Jobs did these amazing things. And he goes, did he? Or did he just go up to all these technicians and say, you're going to build this and you're going to do it all right here. And I'm going to have a phone and I'm going to have a computer and I'm going to have a camera and we're going to have GPS and it's all going to be right here. And you make it happen right now or you're going to be fine. You know, and of course that's true. It's the nerds that do the heavy lifting, but the nerds are like, highly specialized serfs, right? They're like really good peasants, very sophisticated, equipped peasants who need a king to kind of
I
tell
think
them.
it's a little different. I think it's a little different.
Okay, explain.
Steve Jobs was an artist. Everything that came out of Apple was Steve's art. He threw away more than you ever saw because it didn't look right, didn't feel right. Software developers, and who we affectionately call nerds, geeks, whatever, most people don't know this, but writing software is an art form. Yes, AI can do some basic stuff for you, but it is truly art. In fact, some of the best software programmers I know are bass players. Musicians have a inherent gene that really makes them good at coding software because it's like writing prose.
Yeah.
It's like writing poetry. It's not, yes, it's structured, but how you approach software is 100% a creative endeavor. And I believe he spoke to the serfs who were always addressed as serfs. He tapped into their artistic mind and said, let's really build some beautiful art together. I think,
Yeah.
and he could be as maniacal as an artist. I mean, if he could have cut off his ear like Van Gogh, he might have. I think that's really what made Apple so phenomenal. And they clearly don't have that artist at the top anymore.
Well,
so I think that's what happened there.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand that I'm taking away from his creative.
It's more for the serfs. It's more for the software developers that I like to speak, that I view them as artists. I really do.
Okay. But you know what? All the great artists still needed to be commissioned. They still needed somebody
Absolutely.
that gave them a vision and allowed them to implement the vision, right? I mean,
Yep.
Michelangelo didn't come up to the Pope and say, hey, how about we paint
I
this
got an
ceiling?
idea.
Yeah, just thinking the ceiling's kind of blank. Uh, I got some extra paint
Got
from
an
the
idea.
yeah, just thought I'd throw this up. It'll take me 5 years, but any shot that I should paint something on the ceiling. But my point is that and I'm an artist, right?
Yes, of course.
And I just say that as more of a pragmatic title, not as some sort of anointing. I think creatively, I think right brain. I'm a comic, so I would never diminish the visionary. Obviously, they're unique. They're not typical. They
Nope.
come out of nowhere. They're that you don't see it coming. You don't. They're not everybody. It's rare. So I'm not diminishing that. I guess what I was getting at was though that sometimes we underestimate the value of the peon, of the peasant who does the dirty work and
Yeah.
does the hard labor and isn't given the accolades often and are necessary. Yeah. I worked in a factory years when I was at high school making boxes. It was box factory. It was in between my senior year. And I was in there and I'll never forget this. Different machines. So I'm on this machine and 50 pre-cut slabs of paper would come out, get 50 stacked. You and another guy would pull it out, take these hammers, break off the template around it. So you have this basically box that could be folded into a packaging container. You finish breaking them up, stick them into another box, turn around, there's another 50, and you do it again and again. Adam, I almost started breaking down weeping. I hated this beyond anything I could comprehend. I would like make these stupid boxes and stick them in there and turn, and there's another 50. It's like this never ends. And it is the most mundane. It's like I was short circuiting, but it taught me something. I will never, 17, 18 years old, I don't know what I'm going to do for my life, but I ain't going to work in a factory because I can't do this. I'll kill myself. Well, my makeup as a artist, I've also learned some of my detriments, autistic, ADD, obsessive compulsive. So I have some mental disorders that also often go along with the creative. It's the double-edged sword of creative people. Is we have these sort of crosses we have to bear. It's a punishment. We're been given a
With
special
you. I'm
anointing.
with you, brother. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I have Tourette's. That's my that's one of my mental issues. And it's very hard to be on television with Tourette's.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, well, have you overcome? I mean, I don't know
No,
what your tick is, but I don't see any.
it's there, believe me. It's all
Okay.
head movements, all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was good for MTV, you know. Hey, a minute 30, I can
Yeah.
contain it for that. But I'm just agreeing with you that all creative everybody, of course, has a cross to bear somewhere.
Yeah.
They're not always visual, but they're
Well,
there.
and I'm not, and yeah, I will say this too. Also, Adam, I've never made excuses for my dysfunctions because they are what they are, and I have to overcome them. And they've always forced me to overcome. Like how? Okay, it's a challenge. What am I going to do with this? Become a victim, or say, okay, how do I manage this? And how do I navigate this thing outside of doing drugs, which is what I'm old enough that they didn't, I don't even know that they diagnosed ADHD or whatever the heck they call it nowadays in the 60s. So you were just a problem kid. You were hyperactive. There was no Ritalin.
Right. Yep.
And so you were just locked in the corner because you were out of control and you don't know why.
You were a boy. You were a kid.
You were a boy. But you know what,
Yeah.
Adam? If you don't understand your mental makeup, especially if it's a dysfunctional element, you think something's wrong with you.
Yeah.
You beat yourself up. You get angry, almost hate yourself
Hmm.
because you feel like, why is everybody okay but me? Why can't I just not be affected by this or that? And so there's a great freedom and healing by simply being made aware that you have a handicap. Doesn't fix it, but at least you can say it's not your fault that you have a disorder. But there's also some beauty to it too if you can use it to overcome and of course as a Christian, I realized that when God said you're crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, he meant it. That every one of us who are Christ followers have pains and difficulties and challenges and traumas in our life that we would never have chosen, that are literally our crucifixion. I'm crucifying you because I've chosen you to carry this weight,
The
to have
thorn
to
in your
do
side.
this thing. Yeah. And then you're going to die.
P.S.
And then I'm going to resurrect you, and you will heal thousands, hundreds of thousands. And this is the story of Jesus. One man crucified without sin, unjustly, who restores to life after paying that price so that billions and trillions can be healed by his sacrifice. And Adam, Christians are called to do that every day. My crap I've had to go through. So I can go to somebody and say, I know exactly how you feel. I can't fix it and I can't walk it for you, but I've been that road. Follow me. That I can do. And that's my resurrection story. And I think we all have it. And obviously you have one too, because you said you've been a Christian for 2 years. Now you're obviously a very intelligent dude, very creative guy. Now I do believe that that's God inspired. I believe that throughout history, when people talked of their muse, usually a woman or who knows, nature, it was God. It was God is their muse. He's the creator of all things. And they just don't acknowledge him as such. So tell me the story of Adam Curry, the Podfather, the innovator, multimillionaire-ish. I don't know where you're at. It's not my business, but come and go with your finances. You owned a castle. And 2 years ago, at an older age, you humbled yourself and said, you know what? There's something bigger than me, and I'm ready to follow that that being for the rest of my life. What in the world was that story?
I'd like to add before I jump into it. In 1990, something happened to me, which was I only now understand. MTV, by the way, didn't really like me that much. They wanted me to cut my hair, and I wouldn't cut my hair, and they would tell me to do stuff and be like, "No, I don't want to do that." You know, different regimes came in. I was fired from time to time. Usually, it was just like a symbolic thing, and I was back the next day. I insulted Richard Marx one day, and so I was fired. And then I wasn't. But then in 1990, my producer called me and said, "Dude, this time is for real. You're really, really, really fired." And this could not have come at a worse time. I had a new baby. I had a mortgage. I had, a couple grand in the bank. This was not good. And cable didn't pay very well back in the day. Still doesn't, probably worse now. I was freaking out. I mean, I really did not know what to do. What am I? Because it was real, real, real. And for about 5 days, I'm eating myself up on the inside. I didn't want to tell my wife. And like, what am I going to do? And I was just so worried about the money and how am I going to get money? What can I do? And then like a week later, the producer calls me up and says, well, guess what? They couldn't find anybody to replace what you do. So they're hiring you back on a contract basis for 4 times as much as you made before. And at that moment, I decided never again will I worry like that about money ever. So I never have, and I've never cared. Easy come, easy go. I now feel rich in many ways. I never became a billionaire, never became a multi-millionaire. I'm almost 60 and I'm alive and I'm working and I'm happy. My only religious experience was Unitarian, where my parents were in a group in the Netherlands. And this is my Unitarian remembrance. We got up at 3 one morning to drive several hours to find a hill. It's a very flat country. And there were a bunch of other Unitarians. And then we sat on this hill and watched the sunrise. And on a cassette deck, they played Cat Stevens' Morning Has Broken. And it ruined sunrises and Cat Stevens for me forever. Like this is no good. I've always had respect for Christians on my podcast. Sometimes I would throw out something and people would email me. This was early. We've been doing it for 17 years. Very early on, people say, hey, could you do me a favor? Could you not take the Lord's name in vain? So I never did that. So there's respect there. She started kind of getting nudges. She says, we moved to Fredericksburg, which is about 80 miles west of Austin. We've been here for 3 years now. And she was thinking about maybe finding a church. Now I work on Sundays. I do my show live at 1 p.m. But we were talking about it, and a couple things happened in succession. We were supposed to go on vacation to Aruba, and this was right after COVID, and pilots were a problem, and scheduling was a problem. And so we're in the car. It's 4 a.m. We're driving to the airport. Ding, flight canceled. Oh, okay, we'll go back. Then move to tomorrow. We go to the next flight. We're driving to the airport 4 a.m. again. Ding, flight canceled. At this point, we only have 3 days left, so we're going to cancel Aruba. But the driver said, God clearly has another plan for you guys. And so as we're sitting around, I had the week off, so I had no Sunday show. And so why don't we go to a church, Episcopalian church here, I think. And we went there. It wasn't exactly what we were looking for. And Tina actually, through some of her friends, found Bridge Church, and she started going. I would watch online on YouTube while I was prepping for my show. And Pastor Jimmy Pruitt, I'd never really watched any of this, but I'm like, this is quite interesting. Here's a guy with tattoos. He plays guitar. There's, the music isn't lame. And he had a message. And so I found that very, very intriguing. Now, the show that I do, No Agenda, with John C. Dvorak, I'm known as the crackpot. I literally will dive into any quote unquote conspiracy theory you can come up with. And I've done so for 20 years. I call myself a conspiracy therapist. And, I've looked into JFK shooting, the moon landing, you name it, I've looked into it. Also, the pandemic, we were very early in seeing what that was. And I thought, maybe I should really look at this God and Jesus conspiracy theory and see what that's all about. That's literally how I approached it.
So do you normally lean conspiracy, like you actually normally lean more towards accepting that as reality, or are you more of the skeptic?
I come from media. I don't believe anything the media tells me. I know how the sausage is made. I've faked so much stuff myself. Like, no. And I know how it works in the milieu and what you're told to say. I can go into endless examples of that, even on MTV. It's fake, people. It's fake. Most of it is.
Yeah.
And all at the same time, we're also doing podcasting 2.0, which we've made it completely void of any deplatforming, even monetary deplatforming. I did this with a buddy of mine in Alabama, and I'm actually looking around. I'm like, Dave, Mo, all these guys are Christians. What's wrong with me? So I start looking into it, and someone sends me the book Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and I'm looking at this. I'm like, holy cow! There's like historical, empirical evidence that all of this was real and existed. And I also got Jesus. It was Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldridge. My buddy Texas Slim, who's really been advocating for ranchers and how we get beef directly from ranchers to consumers. He's from West Texas, and whenever he went through to Austin, he'd stay overnight here, and so he'd be out there on the porch, and he said, "Let me tell you about Jesus." I'm like, this is coming from a rodeo dude, right? Tall, lanky, broken every bone in his body. He says, Jesus was a badass outlaw. Let me tell you why. And so he starts telling me all this stuff. And so I'm just like, whoa. Within 2 weeks, Brad, I knew it. This was real. This was real. Jesus is real. God is real. And so I'm really starting to dive into the Bible, and I talk about it a bit on my show. So people are sending me books, and I'm just getting more and more convinced. Now I'm starting to pray. I pray when I walk the dog in the morning, and I started very simply. Lord Jesus, Jesus Christ, my Savior, forgive me my sins. I'm a sinner. And I would almost like the Alcoholics Anonymous chant. I do it 12 times even, and then at a certain point I start praying for other people, and I saw things change. And I even understood Stevie Wonder's song, which Songs in the Key of Life is one of my favorite double albums ever. And there's a song, Just Go Have a Talk with God. The lyric is like, if life just seems so hard, just go have a talk with God. And I'm like, oh, I kind of understand it. And then I started to build up this dialogue, and now I'm hooked. And so I'm watching online. And at that moment, Joe Rogan calls. I'd already been on a show a couple times, and he says, Adam, time to come on. So I go on Joe's show, and Tina says to me the night before, are you going to talk about your faith journey? I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I have to. And she was a little concerned because what will that do? Will that make me a kook, a weirdo? And so I lay it out for Joe, probably about 30, 40 minutes. And at a certain point, he starts pushing back, and I say, "Hey, man, I'm a baby here. I'm just learning. I don't have all the answers, but I know this is real." And so much, my testimony basically, and so much love and encouragement came back, and people who said, "Oh, I've been praying for you for 15 years," and just it was really, really amazing. And it's to such a degree where I went, "What am I doing? I need to get up at 5 o'clock on Sunday so I can go to church, come back, and then do the show." And it's just spun into such an important part of our life. We do Bible study in the morning, independently, but we're discussing together. I'll always remember we had the pastor and his wife came over to dinner. Like, oh, the pastor and his wife. Oh, we're all like, what are we going to do? And so it's Pastor Jimmy and Annette. You know them both. And I'm talking to Pastor Jimmy, and I said, "Man, I really love your show." And he starts cracking up. I said, "I've never heard anyone describe it as a show." I said, "Well, I'm sorry." He said, "No, that's so right." I said, "Because it is. You got a format, you got music, I can see how you put it together." And so this journey has just been ever expanding. And, now I'm going through my founder's Bible. Oh man, when you see this country starting from 1608 with the pilgrims in the Netherlands, how crazy can it be that I have that background as well?
Yeah.
That it comes all the way, and you see all the things that are written, and it was all based on God, all based on natural law, and then to realize how psyop people have become about separation of church and state and where government gets its power from. I mean, these are things that in my own programming now I'm pushing back on it, and now I have the authority and the understanding to push back on it. I just got God is giving me downloads. I've got stuff to do. It's like I have a lot more work to do, another 60 years at least. So I think I can make it to that 120.
Because you are more of this conspiracy theory exposer or an analyst, or however you describe it.
Therapist, conspiracy therapist.
Okay. So, well, but you know what? Here's the thing. Every human being has a presuppositional worldview. Every one of us has a standard how we see the world and how we judge it. And based on that is how we vote or how we behave or what we think is good or bad, because of a foundation we've chosen to be true. Some of those truths can be exposed as detrimental. Marxism, or I don't know, secular humanism or relativism, can all be examined through history and see, I think oftentimes people are more, I think you got to go beyond just what you believe, but say, hey, and by the way, does it work? Does your belief system work?
How's that working out for you?
Yeah, let's put it into practice and see what has it given us? What has it given humanity, especially the secular humanist who believes we should jettison God? Let's just use rationale and reason and logic, and we'll just do good things. And I'll say, well, show me where that is even feasible. If my subjective opinion becomes reality and you have to live by it, then if I'm a Nazi and I have control, Jews are subhuman, I can burn them. If I believe that a woman's bodily autonomy supersedes the life of a body inside of her, I can kill it. You can make horrifying decisions and choices and justify them based on the foundation as to how you see the world. And there is no morality. There is no good without God. It can't happen. It's
Amen.
all subjective opinion based on whoever has the power and the authority. But only with the transcendent can there be an absolute immutable truth by which all standards have to be based. And that's what is, just from a practical, pragmatic standpoint, why God is necessary. That's why you hear sometimes atheists speak about acting as though God existed, because they still need that formula just to allow themselves to circumvent human pride or power struggle to control. But you said something about his show. It just triggered something. I don't know if you know this about me, and there'd be no reason why you would, because who gives a crap about me? But I was a professional magician before I was a comedian.
Oh, I can totally see that. I having seen your show, which, by the way, if I can just take a quick sidestep and say, wow. I mean, you came to our church, you did the whole performance, which is a part of the Patriot Academy, Rick Green package. Man, I was looking at you like, this is going to be an interesting room. How does this work? What kind of jokes does he make? And you just consistently nailed it. And it was so good. I really, really enjoyed that. And Tina and I walked out. We're like, not only did we laugh, like belly laugh, we were laughing hard, but we were inspired at the same time. So, and I think when you do that, and you also, it's a way of mocking the truth, but doing it through the word of God and Jesus, that, and you can be secular and get the whole gag. It was just outstanding. I had no idea what to expect. I'd never seen it. Purposely didn't watch any of your videos because I wanted to just come over me. It was phenomenal. So I want to give you that, man, and book this man because he's good.
Well, that's very, very kind. Thank you so much. And for somebody that has the artistic acumen that you do, I take that as high praise. And thank you for that. But there's a book, it's an obscure book, famed from England, from Britain, so it was hard to get in it. But because it's in the world that I was interested in, sleight of hand, I was a professional sleight of hand artist
Sure.
in Southern California in the early 80s. That's how I started my career in the performance arts. And so I had this book called The Death and Resurrection Show. And basically what this guy's premise was how did we even come up with the ideas of stage shows? How do we have a guy comes up and has a band and people pay money and he sings to them? And we just think, well, yeah, you just, you're a band, and we come see. It's like, well, how did that even start? I mean, there's some guy, anybody can sing. Why am I giving this guy a rooster and a hand-woven blanket to listen to him sing if I can do it? Why is there magic? Why is there plays that are just pretending to tell a story? What is all this crazy stuff? And basically his premise was that all of these ideas came from the shaman. All of the tribes had holy men who would tell the stories of the tribe, and they would pass on the stories of the great hunt, and perhaps they would draw pictures to remind themselves, and there would be power in those photos. So suddenly you have the artist, the drawer, the writer, or they would have little clay things, and now you have the sculptor. And then they would do magic to prove they had the power that they should be listened to, and so they would counterfeit supernatural things to show that I am the power man, so you come to me for. And then they would come up with concoctions to heal you, and then you get chemistry, and you get right, and singing the songs and so forth. So, and then that sort of transitioned into sort of a monetary element of culture, that you can not only make money but entertains and tells stories, because all stories are God's story. There was this great thing, and then it fell apart, and how do we fix it? All stories are the same. Why are we here? What went wrong? How do we fix it? That's the story of humanity. And Jesus certainly is the only one who was actually historically viewed as someone who did miraculous things. People saw it, and then he died and came back to life to prove he wasn't a cult. I'm the only guy that's pulled this one off. You don't have to believe it, but nobody's ever done this one and recorded it and had people go to their death saying, I saw a guy die and come back to life, so I don't want to die, but I saw it, and that's okay. Then I'm going to be with him. And this idea that there's something supernatural, Adam, there's something greater than ourselves. Every human being behaves like that every day of their life. They act as though life has meaning. The one thing an atheist, if he's honest, like Nietzsche was, or Bertrand Russell was, or others, if atheism is true, then nihilism is the only conclusion. There is no meaning to life. We're an accident.
If you're true to your word, yeah.
If you're true to your word. But when Nietzsche talked about the man with the lantern saying God is dead, and many people champion that as this wonderful enlightenment, postmodern sort of conclusion that got us out of the superstition of religion. But that's not what he was saying. He said this is a tragedy. If God is dead, there's no rules. Why are we here? He was literally lamenting the fact that I don't know why I'm here anymore. There's nothing for us. Every time a Richard Dawkins writes a 500-page book reaching the conclusion that life is meaningless, he finds meaning in his conclusion. You can't even function as a nihilist without finding a counterintuitive idea that you've already jettisoned and live by it, just so you can function as a human being. Your very belief system can't hold up without stealing from the one that you said is irrational. The proofs of God are all over the place, but buddy, he doesn't make it easy.
Isn't it interesting to see how people like Dr. Stephen C. Meyer and other very, very intelligent scientific people are now just saying, you know, it was clearly intelligent design. This whole Big Bang thing, Dawkins theory, it doesn't hold up. And this is this is a crisis in science, actually. And I find that just encouraging, at the same time fascinating. There's a little overlap I just wanted to share with you, which
Please.
only came to mind when you said that you were a magician. Probably was 9 or 10, and someone, I don't know who, gave me, I think it was called The Big Book of Magic. It was hardcover, it was huge, and it had Houdini, how Houdini did some of his tricks, and I was fascinated by it. And for a little while there, Brad, my dad would take me once a month to the magic store in Amsterdam, and I'd saved up my money, and when I would buy a trick. And I had the cups, I had the ropes, I had the rings. I'm not going to tell anybody how that works. I will say my favorite was the big playing card that had the dots on it. It was, and you'd hold it up and you could turn it around. It would have different dots. And, you know, of course it was magnetic and you could move the dots around on the back. So I was learning sleight of hand. Interesting overlap there. I didn't become a magician, but I think it did have something to do with, for me, the theater of the mind of radio. You know, how can I use things to create something, an illusion, really?
Yeah.
And maybe that's necessary for when you really see something magical happen, when you really see what you just said, understand that Jesus went, hold my beer.
Yeah.
Let me show you what I can do here. And it's been prophesized. It's in the Old Testament,
Yeah.
and watch me do it. It sucks, but I'm going to have to go through this.
Yeah.
And I'm going through it as the Son of Man, which means all the pain and humiliation that came with it is mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing when I think about that.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp that God dies. That's a hard one to go.
Yeah.
For real. God dies and then resurrects himself, which is the only one that could do it. The story is either the most ridiculous story ever, or it brings you to your knees. Oh
Yeah.
my, I'm worth something. I'm here for a reason. There is something greater than all of this. There's a purpose beyond all this, and that I have a Father that will never leave me or forsake me, and I will spend eternity in a place I always belonged, that I lost, my forefathers lost a long time ago. It is so beautiful, and it's so mind-boggling that why would anybody not only deny it, but be adamantly opposed? Because the two things I've seen in atheism, the two standards that seem to be what I've observed in certainly the internet atheism, but kind of in the Four Horsemen, arrogance and anger. They seem to always be angry at the God they don't believe in, which doesn't make any sense. So that, it doesn't make any sense. You're angry at a unicorn or at a leprechaun. What is the point? I believe that most atheists become atheists out of pain. I think it's the most difficult thing for the Christian to grapple with, is the idea of pain, that the little kid has cancer, that there's rape and mutilation of this.
Yes.
It's hard to go, God, just jump in and do something, yeah, right. So
it takes a while to understand why and understand how that works. So that's the I get from family members, friends, like, well, how come, if God's so good, how come ... I lost my child, this happened to me, that happened to me.
We have to walk through the mist and get closer and closer. I learned a long time ago that when you're in the deepest bowels in the Christian world, and you maybe you've experienced it already, I hope so, because if not, you're going to, the dark night of the soul. It seems to be that when God truly calls you to himself, there's this initiation process. There's something that happens that is so stinking dark and painful, where you feel abandoned by God. And Jesus did it. Where are you? Doing the very thing he was called to do, the crucifixion. Why have you forsaken me? It's the initiation into, now what are you going to do? And if you still say you're still on the other side, then you're in. You become you're a made man.
That's a good way of putting it.
And
to answer your question, yes, in multiple forms and severity, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And that's when it counts. Now, luckily, I have a partner. It seems to be kind of rare that get saved around the same time, same timeline. For us, though, particularly at an older age, it's just been it is a literal godsend. It's like could not have been any better timing for us with our history and where we come from.
Well, but I think too, though, you might have a wonderful because my show I wanted to it's called Comedy, Conservatism, and Christianity Collide in a Cacophony of Clarity. So that's Brett Stine Has Issues.
Could only come from the night from the mind of God's comic.
That's right. Well, listen, and by the way, in case I didn't mention it, I may have I think I do mention this in my show. God's comic was given me by New Yorker magazine when they did an
Yes,
article about me. So
you did mention that.
I just so nobody thinks had the
It's like Podfather, you know, close to Godfather. Nope. I didn't give it to myself.
Yeah.
I wear that as a badge of honor, but I didn't give it to myself.
Well, and for me, just how they have the audacity to think I'm God's comic is absurd. So, but I didn't call myself that. That was the online version of the New Yorker when it came out in 2004. So, God's comic, and I'm certainly not ashamed to associate my giftedness that God gave me with God because I've learned, Adam, that my gift isn't comedy. That's my flavor. That's my delivery system. My gift is communication. He gave me the ability to communicate big ideas in laymanistic terms so people can hopefully be intrigued by it and perhaps follow me on this journey. And,
but also it shows, if I can interrupt,
please,
you're doing something which I hope to be doing. So when people say, hey, you're a Christian, I said, no, I have to disappoint you. I'm a Jesus freak. Yeah. And that always gets a smile. Like, oh, I remember these hippies and Jesus freak. Being bold in our faith is what happened. I mean, and that's easy for me to say because I've only been around for two years. Your overall message, when I love it, when a set, if I could speak in jargon, has a message and it leaves people with something. That's a huge win, I think. I would think for a comic, and you leave people with, hey, I can be bold about my faith. I can say things about God. And you actually gave us some tools to do it in a lighthearted way. If not specific tools, you gave us a feeling like, and this is me. It's like when times get hard, I make jokes. I'm always the guy is like, with the humor when it sucks. That's just it's always been my way of coping with things, but it's very effective to be able to just be bold about your belief in Jesus and God. And we need more of that. And I'm sure you get this because ever since I have come out, so to speak, people email me like, I feel a lot better now about speaking up and speaking out and saying, no, I disagree with this. Yeah. Or here's the real history of this. Here's where it comes from. I think that's the most beautiful thing. And yes, you are a communicator.
It's as simple and as complicated as this. If Jesus is who he said he is, which is what a Christian believes, a Jesus freak believes, a Christ follower believes, a follower of the way, which is what the original Christians were called, believes this is actually the Jewish Messiah who made himself available to all humanity, including the Gentiles, who actually was prophesied to prove he's not part of linear time, who actually did miraculous things to prove that he was not a cult leader, but in fact had access and could overcome the natural world and circumvent it through miraculous things that only God could do, who predicted his own death, died, so we know that death is the end, and then came back to life, saying he would do it. People saw it. And he did it bodily, so it wasn't some spiritual thing. So people say, well, it was a hallucination, or people just sort of conjured it up in their mind. This guy was seen by actual people, touched by them, and then said, now this is it. I am the sacrificial lamb. It's over. You've done it. You can walk into the Holy of Holies now. It's your access. I mean, and it was all historically documented. There's never been a story like this in human history. Never. Right. Doesn't make it true. But there's nothing to even come close to consider. If you're going to believe in God, there's no story like this. This is the most plausible of all. But if it was true, Adam, if you really believed it, how could you not tell people? It's about the passion, man. How committed are you to this thing? So you don't have to apologize for being a Christian for 2 years. And oftentimes, the person that's lived the majority of their life without God have such a history of seeing the world without the transcendent that when they find him later in life, they say, dude, I've been on both sides. Trust me, this side is better.
Yeah.
But that could also be said, well, it's new to you. It's kind of a cult thing. You jumped in, you're part of a group now. I mean, yeah,
You had the magic bath.
well, everything's exciting when it's fresh, but you know, it'll run its course. So this could be a wonderful chance for you. And I have watched people from all over the world, believe it or not, watch this. That's the beautiful thing about the internet is like, how did
Sure.
this happen? I got a guy from South Africa and, Japan watching me. But anyways, one thing I tell people on my Mighty 10,000, I'm looking for 10,000 Christians that want to identify as
Yes.
disciples. It's part of my ministry. It's $3 a month, but it allows people to have special questions for my guests. I'm about to ask you your
Oh,
bonus
okay.
question.
Good.
Ask you a bonus question so that it's only for people that donate, and it's only $3 a month. You know, you talked about all these amazing people you interviewed. I thought I would ask you. You know, I'll bet you may have had one or two answers to a question that were maybe shocking or maybe nobody else had ever heard before from a particular celebrity. Can you think of anything that was like, oh man, I remember this one time I asked so and so and he said this and I just never saw that coming. So if you can think of something like that, and if not, just somebody you really found fascinating to talk about, but first name their name, and then and then people that have to subscribe will get to hear the answer to that question. Can you think of any specific thing that really stood out as an amazing answer to a question you never saw coming?
Two people who I had experiences with that I think are worth mentioning because you wouldn't understand it behind these people. And the
Okay, and
first one was Tina Turner. Tina, and there's pictures of us in warm embrace.
Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview. If you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstine.com and join one of the 3 tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000. Is to love your enemy, pray for those who despitefully use you. But what I always say to people is, but the good news is he never asked us what to pray. I always pray first for their salvation. I do, because I have
Yeah,
to.
of course.
I have to. I say, please, God, let Biden accept Christ. I pray for atheists, for Richard Dawkins, for Penn and Teller, people that I
I
think
pray for Joe Rogan. Rogan. I
if
pray
they
for
became
Joe.
believers, and I mean, Joe Rogan, I mean, remember meeting him many years ago, briefly at the Improv when I was finally able to start working the Improv. He wouldn't remember me, and he hadn't even had his podcast yet or whatever. And I always thought to myself, man, we're in the same boat. We're stand-up comics. I got 6 albums, working on my 7th. I was the one that they kind of said started conservative comedy, whatever. I'm the Dave Chappelle of Christian, whatever you want to say. I've heard all these funny things, but I always thought to myself, if God ever gave me the opportunity to talk to him, be on his show as a comic who has this whole different point of view, but has the goods, I would make sure he understood God's calling you, buddy, and you better jump in and see. I
Yes.
could just picture him doing that, but I don't care. That's God's business. If he ever puts me in those positions, so be it. In the meantime, I'm doing the best I can with what he's given me, meeting guys like you, getting this information in the atmosphere, praying for you. I hope that perhaps we can talk again sometime. I hope that we perhaps can stay in touch. And I just love artistic people who are doing God's work, and perhaps we can build a little bit of a friendship over time. Who knows? But in the meantime, thank you for having the time to come on my show, folks. I'm God's comic. Didn't ask for that, but he put me in place. This is Brad Stine Has Issues. As I've said to you before, if you're a true believer, act like it. Speak about it. Be unapologetic about it. It's the greatest story there ever was, and you're the last truth tellers on earth. Guys, if they ever say you're politically incorrect, always say thank you for the compliment. The last thing you want to do is live by Marxist lies. You're a Christ follower. Act like it. And if you're not a Christ follower, join us. It will change your life forever. Folks, I'm just a comic, but I'm doing what I'm called to do. Just putting the woke back to sleep. See you next Monday.